necessarily mean it was an American ship, and I understand that. Now recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Dunn, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Cohen, I appreciate you being here today. In addition to being a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, I serve on the Select Committee on China, and I have experience as a bench scientist at USAMRIID. I'm sure you're familiar with it. It's the Army's Biological Warfare Headquarters, a BSL-4 facility. The Select Committee recently published a bombshell bipartisan report. You're aware of it. You've said on the illegal biolab that was discovered in Reedley, California. This warehouse was located in the center of a small town just across the street from an elementary school and a block down from the city hall. The clandestine, they're calling it a biolab, it's more like a warehouse, was a disaster waiting to happen. The CDC's response, or rather the lack of response, clearly endangered millions of Americans. And there were a couple of things that really stood out to me. The first is that the CDC's Select Agent Program completely failed the people of Reedley, California. The CDC literally refused. They did not respond when they were requested. They responded months later, and only when Congressman Costa made that request to come to the town and assess the situation. The discovery, I remind you, was made by a housing code inspector who was tracing a garden hose that went in a window. That's how this was found. It took a phone call from Costa to get there finally. Once the CDC arrived, months after the first request, the investigation he conducted was completely unprofessional and inadequate. And I say that as a professional in the field. The CDC didn't test one vial, even the ones that were labeled tuberculosis, SARS-CoV-2, and Ebola. An entire refrigerator labeled Ebola. That is a select federal agent, by the way, and HIV was there. This facility is completely unlicensed warehouse, no licensing whatsoever. Over 20 potential pathogens, 1,000 transgenic mice, humanized. There were 0 isolation facilities that would be necessary to either legally or safely handle these agents. And perhaps most egregious and simple-minded, the agency didn't even bother to translate the Chinese labels. There were some vials that had only Chinese labels. Didn't even ask for a translation on this. Amazing. When local officials started to dispose of these materials, they asked CDC what to do with the Ebola. Again, a federal select agent. And a CDC branch chief, I have these emails I'd like to submit for the record.
Without objection?
Thank you. CDC branch chief belatedly responded saying, we don't see an urgent need to test these samples at the moment. Most of the material we identified was not considered a serious threat to public health. HIV, SARS-CoV-2, hepatitis, malaria, and Ebola, not considered a serious threat to public health. But, the conclusion made by the experts at CDC that a refrigerator labeled Ebola was unlikely to contain Ebola. And you look at the totality of this situation, it reads like a nightmare, a horror story. In what world is this okay? And, and I refer to my colleague Gary Palmer's remarks on trust. How do you expect the American people to take our public health institutions seriously when this is their reaction to a very real situation? CDC should not ignore pleas from local public health. And by the way, the California Public Health Service asked them to sample this stuff too. The CDC should test substances if requested by local government. Surely that meets a threshold test. And I'd like you to explain, I'm going to give you a chance to answer some questions here on the minimal time that's left. Is the CDC supposed to be the first line of defense for human infection agents in the United States?
Well, thank you, Congressman, for the opportunity to respond. There were a number of inaccuracies in that report, and so I want to make sure you know that when we were asked and invited by the leaders of that investigation, FBI, FDA, state and local officials, we did deploy. We did look at, we were there for a 2.5-day investigation, and we did not see any evidence of select agents. Not only did we look at all of the paperwork, the vials, the freezers,
Let me, just because we run running out of time, let me reclaim it. Yes, they responded, but they did not respond when they were first requested. They responded months later.
So
I
that's,
mean, that, and we have that on, I mean, we had that examined by the FBI, came to our committee and told us that. That's who we got that information from. If you have better information than the FBI, you need to let us know.
great. We would be happy to share the, more about the timeline, but when we were asked, we did deploy no select agents on site there, and we
I mean,
continue.
how do you know you didn't test for anything?
Well, so, right, this is where our experts did a 2.5-day review. I want to address what you were talking about related to Ebola. When we heard after the fact that someone said something was labeled Ebola, we took 300 pictures. We did not see one
It
bit
was
of
on the
evidence
front of a
related to that.
refrigerator.
We didn't see that. We asked folks to say, do you have a picture of that? Could we validate that for someone else? No one could validate that for us. So, you know.
So we
did
just
not-
blow off the California Public Health Department and say, oh, we don't believe you. You know, obviously my time is expired, Mr. Chairman. I have to tell you, though, in my professional career in biological warfare, I have never seen anything like this. By the way, the worst concern I have, this may not be the only one. This is one that a housing code inspector found. Let's marshal all the housing code inspectors
Gentlemen.
in the country. Turn them loose to find these things.
I appreciate the gentleman's passion. The gentleman's time is up, and now recognize Ms.